We've only included the Sierra Red Zone in these maps for your information so that you can see how they relate to the rockfall management zones that we've got in the plan.
Right.
Proposing in the plan.
So the actual ones that go on the plan don't refer to them at all?
The Sierra Red Zone,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Right.
They don't, no.
Okay, sorry.
It's a different situation from the flat.
Yeah, no,
flatland.
I do understand that, but which map am I supposed to be
Just
looking
in the
at?
legend on the second page, and
Oh, I see.
just to show you, we in the flatland, yes, we do have for information only the Sierra Residential Red Zone for the flatland, and perhaps we should be clear about that too.
And maybe you should put flatland in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Port Hills zones or overlays are all on the left-hand side, and we don't indicate any Sierra
Yeah,
Red
but I
Zone.
didn't know that because the map that you gave us said Sierra Residential Red Zone,
That's
so
why
I didn't go and do a cross-reference to these
that's
set of
why I'm
maps.
just pointing it out now.
Right.
It was simply to illustrate a situation.
Yeah. Well, so are we going to ground truth these? Because we can't write that into a plan if we're not going to do it.
Well, what we need to do is come back to you with an assessment of what the cost will be, and whether that needs to be public or not will be up to you. We need to get an assessment of what it will cost and how long it would take, and then on that basis consider whether or not to move forward.
But there is the desktop exercise to start with, isn't there? And that then gives us an idea of the
It's still not ground truthing though if it's
No,
done
I
on
know
desktop.
that, but the desktop exercises reduces the area that needs to be ground truth, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a starting point. We may accomplish everything we need in a desktop with available information, but I don't want to say that categorically now without going back in. And then we may have to check some areas, but yeah, that would be a better call than trying to go out and map everything at every individual property. So.
Yeah.
We just don't have
But
that understanding yet.
Yeah.
So we can come to you with an understanding of how long the desktop study might take, what that will cost, but we won't know whether or not there's further ground truthing to do until that exercise is finished.
Well, that will identify if there is, specific areas for ground truthing.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, so the first call would go back into the look at the specifics of the GNS model with the information we have, and see whether at a desk level we can drop out these fringe areas and basically make decisions based on that.
Yep.
We may have to just go out and spend a day or two just to check things.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping. So it shouldn't be an onerous, costly exercise. Just need to
Excellent.
make sure.
I like those words very much. All right, so you'll come back to us with a proposal on that, because
Yes.
it seems to me that if we could actually notify in the in our version of the plan reference to further work that's being undertaken, I feel much more comfortable about that. All right.
Okay.
Before we move off this image, I'd just like to draw the councillor's attention to the mass movement 1 area up in the top left-hand corner.
Yep.
And that was one of the other activity in the rule table 5.10.1 that had a proposed prohibited activity status against it, and we're also proposing that be a non-complying activity. You'll be aware that there is a report pending on these mass movement 1 areas, and I understand that while there was not a risk model used for the mapping of the mass movement areas as they are in the plan and on this image at the moment, a risk model is being developed. So at this stage we can't basically tease it apart and identify risk bands and attach different activity status to the more risky, more intolerable risk parts of that mapped area. So we'd have to sort of keep that and consider that possibly as part of this ground truthing in the future study when this report is finalised. So if I can now move on to the other image of the rock hazard area. got on the top council workshop draft rockfall hazard area, Bowenvale Avenue.
Next slide.
Yeah, there's and the next one on. So again, as part of the last workshop, we were requested to consider, because of the councillors not being comfortable with the non-complying activity status across the whole of the rockfall hazard 1 area, we've developed this image to show you the purple areas are where there's a risk of 1,000 or greater, 1 in 1,000 or greater, an annual individual fatality risk, and that's per year on any site in that area. This scale here is 1 to 2,400, so again, fairly small areas, slightly wider, about 20 metres in some parts of that area. So in terms of interpretation of the rules, a little easier to apply when compared to the cliff hazard example. But if you go over to the right-hand side and you look at some of those little tiny slithers at the top there, if you go back then and look at the relative planning map, which is map 46, you'll see it's going to be fairly hard to apply those rules using that scale. Again, as I said with the previous example, the model isn't absolute, it's not reality, it's an estimate of reality, and so to start pulling the rule apart isn't generally supported. I hear what the councillors' concerns are, but all I can say is that, in terms of the existing operative plans, the policy guidance there is relatively weak, and so, as Councillor Johansson suggested, there's a possibility there that non-complying activity rules will get proposals under that rule status may have had a more lenient interpretation in the past because they haven't had the policy guidance. We've got very strong policy guidance here, and we're confident that where we say avoid and we've got a non-complying activity status, that there's only going to be unique and very few situations where approval could be granted.
Dense, is that all forest or park or something at the moment?
Well, a lot of undeveloped land, as you can see there. Down at this area here, there's a little blue line zigzagging through here. This is largely living hills, except for down in the base of the valley, largely living hills, and that's the existing zoning, and then rural hills further south there.
And these big pink things, are they trees or bike tracks?
You can just sort of see through the image, and so, as I said, that's largely undeveloped land, probably being used for pastoral processes,
Right.
farming and that sort of thing.
That's in private ownership, is it?
I understand that the living hills will be. I'm not so. I think a lot of the rural hills could potentially be in council ownership, but I haven't checked that.
Is there public access onto that land?
There is a walkway, as you can just see a little bit of the labelling here to the left is clipped off, so there's certainly around about there's a walkway nearby.
That's the bottom of the Bowenvale bike track and walking track, so that comes from Victoria Park all the way down the end of the street.
So people,
But that's
are
right at the
people
end of the
biking
avenue,
in
isn't
this
it?
in this pink bit?
Probably not that.
No, I'd say you're talking about the end of
Okay,
the avenue
right.
where it winds up to the track down here, councillor. Yeah.
So, sorry to, health and safety, if you have any hazards on your property, do they apply to the private landowner or to us or to whom?
I'll leave that for.
Oh, you get to go. Yep, it's fine.
The obligations under common law for a landowner apply to any landowner, regardless of whether it's the council or anyone else.
So this person, who's the proud owner of this, has to sign that this is a potential rockfall area?
It has to do what, sorry, Councillor?
Well, assuming that this is publicly accessible land
Yep.
and people go on regardless of whether they're welcome, presumably these guys who own this land are required to what? Sign that there is actual rockfall hazard, or what's the requirement for the public safety?
Just to make things a little more confusing, those are the risk zones for rockfall. They're not necessarily the source where the hazard is sitting at the moment. They may be on to the left of the pink line.
No,
So-
I understand that.
Yeah, but who's responsible for notifying the public that there's a risk in going on that land?
Well, the council has a responsibility through exactly this process, through.
Yeah, but when we
telling the
pass
public about
this,
it.
who puts the sign up? Is it the owner of the property or
Yes.
the owner of the source property?
The owner of the property on which people could be affected by the risk.
So there'll
should
be a
tell
rule
people
that
about it.
says,
The owner of the property on which the risk originates has duties under common law to do what's reasonable to stop something escaping from their land and harming someone else. So there's obligations on the owner of the land on which the risk originates. That's under just common law liability. But the health and safety aspect of it and the exposure for a landowner who has something on their land that harms someone puts an obligation on them to tell people to try and manage that risk in some sort of way.
so does that mean we have to mitigate against the rockfall risk anyway?
No.
Why?
The common law obligation is to do what's reasonable in the circumstances.
Well, how do we know it's not reasonable in the circumstances to protect against people using a walkway?
Well, I don't in this particular case, but it takes a lot of work to look at what would be reasonable in the circumstances. But
What I'm trying to get at is if you're the proud owner, for example, of a wind farm, you are required, regardless of whether it's private property, to explain and reasonably do it so reasonably the dangers that there are in going on to that property. I'm assuming, since we now have whole new risks that we didn't previously sort of be so clear on, that the owners of these properties where the rocks are actually potentially going to fall, even if I'm trespassing on his property, I'm assuming that they have to tell me that I am in danger of having a rock fall on my head if I go there.
yeah, I'd need to do a little bit more work myself, councillor, to know whether a landowner's obligations applies to people who are trespassing on their property. I'm pretty comfortable in advising the council that the landowner's obligations apply to people who the landowner permits to enter their property and invites onto their property. I'm not so sure about trespassers.
All right?
I'd just like to, in response to, just to clarify that we do have a new policy 527 that is about promoting awareness of hazards, and that this whole mapping is a way of promoting that awareness.